A very good morning, good evening, good afternoon to one and all who has joined us from across the globe. We are here in the valedictory session where we have completed more than 9 days of intensive curriculum on victimology, victim assistance, and criminal justice. So today we have with us Professor Dr. Sanjeev P. Sahni, who's a Principal Director of Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences and the Director of Center for Victimology and Psychological Studies. I'll request him to address our esteemed audience with a closing remark and share how this program has gone over the 9 days and across the July month. Over to you, Professor Sahni.
Very good evening from India. Maybe good morning to other places. First of all, I would like to thank World Society of Victimology, who permitted us, who allowed us to conduct this particular course. I'll go back. The historical perspective is that the first time the immediate past president, Professor Mark, allowed us to conduct the first course, at OP Jindal Global University. I think at that point of a time, there were around over 45 students. And then we also conducted another course with the help of World Society of Victimology at City University, Hong Kong. And this time, again, when we were thinking that it is a virtual meeting, we were not sure. When I wrote a personal letter to Professor Robert Peacock and Dr. Michael O'Connell that, if you can permit us. Believe me, we received it probably in, I don't know what I am doing. Yes, probably in, oops, is something wrong, Vipin?
No, sir.
Are you guys able to see me?
Yes, sir. You can hear you and see you.
Yes, there's some issues. Okay, so, probably in 48 hours, we received an approval from the World Society of Victimology, both by Professor Robert Peacock and Michael O'Connell. I'm really grateful to both of you. Then, virtually getting so many people was not an easy thing, but we could manage 83 people from 15 different countries. I would say it was very successfully conducted, one of the largest online postgraduate course in victimology, victim assistance, and criminal justice system. So my special thanks to the World Society of Victimology. Just to give you a little brief, what all happened in this, that we delivered as promised more than 35 lectures, and rather it is in number, total number would be 36 when Professor Mark is going to deliver his talk. So, the faculty from over 10 countries, they participated and they acted as an expert. Faculty, they delivered their lecture within the scheduled time. Believe me, it was for 1 hour. Every faculty was so conscious about the timing that all the lectures we could complete well in time, and everyone engaged over topics, ranging from child protection, COVID and victimization, theoretical framework in victimology. The new chapter, which I was very interesting, heard is spiritual victimology, victim assistance programs, cyber victimization, human and sex trafficking, sexual violence, victim and criminal justice system, and many, many others. Experts and professionals from, legal area, social work, psychology, police studies, criminology, victimology background, they all were there. Although from future, if we will be allowed, I would like to have more onto the rehabilitation part and to the support system, that when a person becomes a victim, what kind, although there were quite a lot, but I wish if there are 70% of the total talks are onto the rehabilitation part. Experts, this is another interesting thing. Once participated in the Asian postgraduate course were also a part of the course as speaker, won their years of expertise and services. I want to put it on record that Professor Kirchhoff has attended almost all the sessions, and then Professor Bajpai also, we could see that in 4 or 5 sessions he has attended. Michael O'Connell, Professor Peacock, Charles Kamala. These are the people who have attended 4, 5 talks, and even Dubronica, my very dear friend, also attended a few lectures. So it was not that experts were there only for their talk, but they also were present in other people's talk as well. We hope that resources shared during the course will expand participants' knowledge in the field of victimology, victim assistance, and criminal justice. At all the time, we were having more than 80% students who participated in the entire course, because these days when we run these kind of online classes, we know that students are not interested and they don't, but 80% is all the time. But most of the time it was around 90% people were there. So thank you very much. And I would like to put in record the outstanding contribution of Dr. Vipin Vijay Nair and all the TRIP fellows. I can't name all of them. They, worked very hard to make this particular program a big success. I hope that World Society of Victimology in future also would like to, will trust us to conduct these kind of programs, because many people could not join because it was an online. So maybe we are very keen to conduct every year, like Dubrovnik. If WSV ever approves it, we'll be very happy to. And this was basically a free of cost. The little money, the very little money we charged, for what reason? So that the seriousness should be there. Otherwise, people just want to have a certificate. So we put a little money as a fee so that the participants should be serious enough. I want to announce one very important thing, that this is every year we organize an international conference on victim assistance. Like that, this will be the 10th international conference on victim assistance, which we are organizing from 21st of October till 23rd of October. 21st of October, we are going to have a pre-conference, some workshops, but on 22nd and 23rd, we are planning in a hybrid mode. So we are not sure about October, but most probably it looks like that we will be able to do it in hybrid mode. In case we will not be, then definitely online. And all the participants are encouraged to join us at our university if we are open, otherwise virtually. Experts will conduct a pre-conference. We'll request the very eminent and distinguished faculties to conduct pre-conference workshop to enhance applied perspective of participants in the field of victim assistance. And experts panels will be scheduled during conference on themes like cyber victimization, intimate partner violence, best practice in victim assistance, theoretical victimology, spiritual victimology, positive victimology, and so on. Details of the conference has been shared with you on mail, and we expect huge participation for this conference. We have just informed you. We are going to send it emails as well. And we are also going to send the certificates to all the participants at their residence address, which you have provided to us. So once again, my special thanks to Vipin Vijay Nair and all the experts, 35 experts, those who have already delivered the talks, and today Professor Mark is going to deliver talk. So 36 lectures we could manage to conduct in 9 days training program. Thank you very much, all of you, and over to Vipin now.
Thank you very much, Professor Sani, for those enlightening and encouraging words. I truly believe we'll get a huge participation for our 10th International Conference of Victim Assistance. So now moving on towards the address of ISV President, Professor Dr. G.S. Vajpayee, who's also Vice Chancellor of Rajiv Gandhi National University of Law, Patiala. We will request you to address our audience as an address by ISV, which is International Society of Victimology, Indian Society of Victimology President. Over to you, Professor Bajpai. So you are on mute.
Very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. On behalf of the Indian Society of Victimology, I consider it my privilege to be with you today. And I'm very happy actually for this occasion for a variety of reasons. The first and foremost reason is to visualize the success story of this postgraduate course on the victimology, victim assistance, and criminal justice, which has been organized in this by the Center for Victimology and Psychological Studies at OP Jindal University. Number of people deserve huge appreciation for this success story of this course. To begin with, I have no words to really acknowledge the contribution that Dr. Sanjeev Sahni has been making to really mainstreaming victimology in this country in such a fabulous way. And he has become someone who brings a lot of people to this country, online or offline. And the effort of this entire center is scheme are actually widely recognized now. And everybody look forward to the programs which are being organized at by this particular center and this university. And in fact, I have seen this entire victimological activity has evolved very progressively in this center and in this university. In terms of focus and also in terms of quality of discussion and the quality of material that you produce through these interactions. So big congratulations to Dr. Sanjeev Sahni for your constant efforts. See, it's not one-off kind of thing. He has been very consistent in terms of doing this singular victimological activity, I would say, in this country, so to speak, which is genuinely and international in nature, and it brings huge participation. And of course, I need not to acknowledge, because just Dr. Sahni has already mentioned, and Dr. Bipin, who is the person behind this entire, scheme of the things. Thank you so much. And of course, my friends from World Society of Victimology who are present, I am very happy to see and say hello to Robert Peacock and Michael and Dovonica, and of course, Gerd and my dear friend Mark. You have been such a wonderful support to this center, and because of your involvement and encouragement, this activity is continuously going. And once this is getting over, by the time we could finish it, Dr. Sahni sent us another, lucrative announcement of course, that October. Come October, now October has become synonymous to this International Victimological Conference, which is such a wonderful, again, very consistent. And October, I always say October, I said, what is there in October? I always search for the dates. And the beauty of the entire scheming is that they announce the thing so well in advance that I am hardly left with any excuse that I won't be able to do it this time. But tell me, I am telling honestly, I always look forward, and I am always, looking forward. Yeah.
Now, first of all, I object to what you're saying. It's not that you are a guest over there, because you are kind enough that every time we organize it jointly with Indian Society of Victimology. So you are a part of this organization.
Wonderful. So nice of you. Thank you so much for all your humility. And definitely it has become such a wonderful partnership. I always wanted to be in this gathering, and we are waiting for this again to be happening at your campus. That becomes such a wonderful treat to be. Friends, today I have a small address to make. This address basically, highlights some important developments in the field of victimology in this country as well as globally, but more focused on the Indian situation. And therefore, I start with this. And I also acknowledge, by the way, the faculty, the range of faculty, the number of faculty members who have contributed to this is phenomenal again. So all kudos to go to the organizers. But of course, by way of this address, I have something to say that the victimology in the recent past had made some significant progress as a discipline and also as a practice. And as a discipline, the journey of victimology followed an interdisciplinary path. And when I say interdisciplinary path, I am more encouraged at this point of time to share something very important. The Indian government has recently adopted new
I think Professor Bajpai.
There's some issues with his network.
I think he has joined from another. No.
Maybe it's the raining cats and dogs that's got to him.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
Okay. So I was mentioning that the new education policy in India necessarily captures a requirement of interdisciplinarity. And therefore, I am visualizing and looking forward that many social science subjects are now likely to be, becoming and opening up more and more. And therefore, I find there is a lot of scope for victimology to be integrated in some of the major social science disciplines. That is the policy decision that has been taken at the level of the government. So I, at my university, is also exploring where the subject of law or criminology would interface and what are the subjects. But for the information of all that, when I was at the National Law University, Delhi, I had instituted a center for victimology, criminology and victimology. And through that center, we have carried out a number of activities. Though I am just 1.5 months old to this university, but I am very happy to share that I have already started the process to set up a center for victimology studies in this university as well. So this would again attract a lot of scholarship and a lot of attention, as I have been doing. We know that historically the victimology has evolved through some very, very pioneering work by the scholars across the globe, right from von Hantig, Lenwerzer, Mendelssohn, Schaffer, Keen, Pease, Shetland, Schneider, Peta, and lot many. And we have seen that the victimology since then has brought significant changes in the manner the victim was being perceived and looked at in the criminal justice system and also in the society. The appointment of President Task Force of Victim of Crime in 1982 in the US, followed by the UN Declaration of 1985, these two developments have definitely made a drastic impact on the contemporary victimological scene. Contemporary victimological activism has mainly resulted into certain developments. First of all, there was a series of studies in interdisciplinary social sciences on this subject, which brought the crime victim into a focus. And secondly, initiatives leading to the launch of victimization survey in the United States, United Kingdom, and other European countries have again brought the issue of dark figure and the perception of crime victim towards criminal justice system into sharp light. Thirdly, the rights of victim got recognized. Fourthly, a very significant debate about the status of victim in criminal justice system got started. And lastly, remarkable development leading to the beginning of victim assistance, including compensation, reparation, and restitution, had started. Even smaller countries joined the tandem to capture the essence of worldwide developments in the area of victim protection. And these countries have either brought separate laws, enactments, or changed their laws and amendments in the criminal justice system to address the core concerns of crime victims. Friends, through this presentation, I have identified certain core concerns which are crucial to the development of victimology in this country and victimological research as such. The first of all, a lot of focus has continued on the studies on vulnerability and vulnerable groups. Speaking from the standpoint of India, the incidence and rate of victimization is a true indicator of the extent to which the people are exposed to the risk of crime. However, the data on crime only display the occurrence of victimization in case of those who suffered it, but it does not show as to how others are impacted by crime. So for instance, even to those who have not been directly affected, they also feel a sense of risk or a sense of insecurity. However, criminal justice system does not take into account their concern and their security risk. So crime essentially has a psychic effect on the quality of life of the people and on their daily freedoms and enjoyment of many fundamental rights. And crime or victimization impairing the quality of life and fundamental rights given by the Constitution is something which brings victimology into much more prominence. Victimization of women in many cities is believed to have deteriorated their quality of life in several ways as they stay in a state of risk and are forced to return early to their places, and their choice to visiting places, especially in the late hours, got seriously restricted. This is the most detrimental form of victimization, which is invisible and subtle. Risk of victimization and fear of crime are two most disabling factors affecting the life of people. In India, there is no substantial measure to understand these effects. Non-availability of data and information with respect to pattern of victimization, relative risk, effect of victimization, victim-offender relationship, post-victimization data, etc. is the biggest hurdle in empirical understanding of the real contours of criminal victimization. However, the popular media reports and social media discussions clearly indicate that the occurrence of what Richard Bach terms as a risk society, the Indian victimology now gearing to focus its attention to the effect of vulnerability and also to the dimension of effects on certain vulnerable groups like children, women, weaker section, who often become the subject of victimization in a processual manner. Therefore, victimological inquiry into this subject would greatly help us in devising prevention strategies. I'm very happy to share that I was invited to be the part of an advisory committee appointed by the Government of India to constitute a victimization survey for India. And we have worked a preliminary draft for victimization survey. And I'm happy to share that some start to conduct the victimization survey has already started. Second focus that I wish to make in this presentation is on marginalized and ignored. Those who are considered to be lesser beings, who are those and how victimology addresses their concern. So turning to this challenge, victim justice in India is largely an issue of access of victim to the criminal justice system. Victim is one who triggers criminal justice, but often finds the door of criminal justice system tightly guarded by its agents. The decisions, many decisions of Supreme Court has recently brought essentially what we are now calling the victim jurisprudence in this country. I'm very happy to share that a lot of credit to the evolving of victimological jurisprudence in this country goes to the Supreme Court of India, who through a number of judgments have laid down a solid foundation to the rights of the victim, victim protection, and victim assistance as such. And I'm again very pleased to share that I have shared some of my judgments where I was asked by the court to help. So in one of the judgments, the Delhi High Court has institutionalized the victim impact report as an essential measure to be followed by the investigating officer and also by the courts, especially at two stages. One, when the quantum of compensation is to be decided, essentially the impact of victimization needs to be taken into account. Earlier, there was no method of assessing quantitatively the kind of impact the crime has caused to the victims of crime. Therefore, now a report which I have devised has been accepted by the state of Delhi and they are implementing it. And secondly, the same report is going to be very, very useful for determining the quantum of sentence to be awarded to the guilty person. Generally, victim impact report in all other jurisdictions, especially in Europe, I can say, they are using it to understand the consequence of victimization and to provide victim assistance. But in this country, I have also advocated for that this report must be utilized at the time of sentencing. So application of victim impact report at the stage of sentencing is altogether very new development, which is coming through a victimologist, because I assisted the court and I have given the entire report. Second very important victimological development, which is associated with this issue, is the victimization, victims of abuse of power. I would not say abuse of power, but victims who have been wrongfully prosecuted. They were initially the accused who have been wrongfully prosecuted. Again, there was no system of providing any assistance and compensation to this category. Again, I was part of a case where I produced an entire report, and I'm happy to see the law has been amended to incorporate some of my suggestions, including the compensation and assistance part to the victims of wrongful prosecution in this country. So some of these developments are very encouraging as far as the judicial attitudes towards victimology in this country is concerned. And therefore, I find that some of these developments can be very useful. So this is possible when we are talking about the victim participation into the trial. Some developments are interesting because it is possible at various stages of trial, the victim can be given some degree of attention. Because in trial, a trial cannot be called a fair one if it does not put a victim at par with an accused in the adjudication process. The objective is not to somehow secure the conviction of the accused. Rather, the objective is to ensure justice. So when a victim is enabled and made part of decision-making at various stages, the research suggests that he has a greater degree of satisfaction and sense of justice, regardless of the outcome of case. Victim can be heard at the stages of charge framing, discharge proceedings, bail hearing, evidence, cross-examination, probation, sentencing, compensation, appeal. These are the stages. I have been making noise, and in fact, in all circles, that let there be some degree of participation of the victim. And so initially there was reservation on the part of legal fraternity in this country. And they asked that why it should happen. I said, if you sense the justice to be a comprehensive one, then essentially you need to incorporate the victim. So comprehensive justice would mean the involvement of victim. And involvement of victim is more and more towards fair justice and a fair trial. A trial cannot be fair unless the victim has some say to it. And therefore, I'm saying that at some stage, so we have been successfully able to incorporate some of these things. I'm very happy to say, though it would be too premature to say, I am also the member secretary of the Criminal Law Reform Committee appointed by the Government of India. They have asked the important amendments to be made. In other areas, definitely we are doing. but I was more keen to emphasize the victim-centric reforms in the existing criminal laws in this country. I'm very happy to share that I was able to get a lot of things incorporated already in the criminal justice system of this country. And law is now being amended. I'm sure once this report is presented, the India would see a lot of victim reform happening actually. So from scholarship to practice, some of these reforms have already been taken up. And I am in touch with the Ministry of Home Affairs, who is definitely listening on some of these changes which I am raising. And I was able to convince through a lot of research which my fellow victimologists have been able to conduct in India and abroad. And I was able to demonstrate that how these victim-centric reforms in the existing laws could bring a huge difference. So therefore, I am quite hopeful as far as this particular issue is concerned. Another thing is the victim assistance issue. In India, as I have already said, that there is a state compensation scheme. Unfortunately, not many such arrangements in India have been subjected to a rigorous evaluation to empirically understand as to whether they are contributing on the ground to the real victims of crime. And I find that this kind of work is now has been undertaken in the recent past. So I call it is the third very important critical concern for victimology, to give a flip to the entire idea of comprehensive victim assistance. Initially, in most circles, they think that merely the pecuniary or monetary compensation would be suffice or would be sufficient. I have been emphasizing there are not many other things in terms of victim services. I was able to demonstrate the handbook of victim, and I was able to tell them that, look, the comprehensive victim assistance would mean the network of services that. So we are emphasizing initially, indeed, to constitute a national victim service authority kind of system, through which a network of services could be organized, which can be of assistance. Because in this country, we have a national legal service authority, which is primarily providing legal aid to the people. I'm emphasizing and stressing that let it be expanded to cover the victims of crime also, in terms of extending a variety of services other than legal aid. So it could be psychological services, rehabilitation, protection, and other kinds of measures which can be undertaken. So victim assistance would essentially now mean the recognition of the rights, and these rights includes care and right to seek guidance in various matters, right to probation, and several right to rehabilitation, compensation, right to fair deal, restitution, rehabilitation, and therefore very soon, I think we will see these changes becoming a very, very important reality. And I would also say that India would then become a very important destination. How a major victim reform can be realized by bringing massive criminal law reform or criminal justice reform. Because the non-government sector is actively engaged in terms of providing the services side. But we have been stressing that, look, unless you bring some fundamental changes in the manner in which the criminal justice functions, the manner in which these laws operate, so many things are very crucial. So victim centricity is necessary as far as some of these laws are concerned. The last leg of this discussion is scholarship in the field of Indian victimology. I find that this fourth and last concern is to encourage teaching, research and scholarship in the area of victimology, victim assistance, victim statistics, victimization survey, university level, graduate, postgraduate, focusing on victimology, policy research. A lot of things are necessary. So victimology in India may have a greater relevance than any other country, as the country is characterized by stark socioeconomic inequalities. People have various levels of access to the system. Education and living is highly unequal. This makes people suffering very, very peculiar, requiring a scientific research. So concentrate efforts are now required to prevent secondary victimization, what we call. Evidences in India are enough to suggest that secondary victimization, like form of neglect, stigma, maltreatment, and indifference by the agencies, officials, social actors is highly pervasive. There are hardly any normative framework or any other arrangement in India to protect the victims from those untoward experiences. So victimology in the course of time need to become a science of human safety and safe living, ensuring a quality of life informed by standardization of norms, protocols, and standards to alleviate human sufferings through professional services to the survivors in most dignified form and as a matter of right. It would be a matter of great satisfaction if Indian victimology is guided to cover some of these issues. As a president of Indian Society of Victimology, I consider that it is my duty and my humble service that we are trying our level best to especially encourage the students, young students, to work more and more in the field of victimology. And some of such developments at the official level also are now becoming very, very encouraging. So I find that there is very good potential for victimology to groom in this country. And I'm sure with the support of all the stakeholders in India and my friends in other countries, including World Society of Victimology and other fellow victimologists in many countries, we would be able to, lay a very solid foundation for victimology who would prove to be a great service to the mankind and to the society. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Bajpai, for those encouraging words and being a strong pillar of victimology in India. Taking into account that today is United Nations World Day for Prevention of Trafficking in Person, we would like to inaugurate the Financial Crimes Lab, which is one more initiative of Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences. And I would like to request Professor Bajpai if he could inaugurate the same. I'll share my screen. We will be inaugurating Financial Crimes Lab in the august presence of Professor Bajpai. Thank you, Professor Bajpai. Professor Bajpai, you are on mute if you want to say.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to see this, again, a great initiative coming from your center. Wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you, Professor Bajpai. And we will request all of you, if you have any query regarding the same, do visit JIP's website. All the details are mentioned there, and you would be able to see what all we would be going forward to do in case of any research collaboration, any kind of advocacy or awareness aspect. You can surely reach out to us through our JIP's website. So thank you, Professor Bajpai, for those words. We will now move on to our final valedictory address, which will be delivered by Professor Dr. Mark Rohinson. I'll just take a couple of minutes to just introduce Professor Mark. Professor Mark has been full professor of criminal law, criminal procedure, and victimology at Tilburg University in Netherlands since 1987. In 2005, he became the founding director of InterVic, which is the International Victimology Institute Tilburg, which developed the largest dedicated research center on victimology in the world. He is the member of board of director of International Society of Criminology. From 1991 until 2004, he was president of United European Forum of Victim Service, later named as Victim Support Europe. From 2009 to 2018, he served as president of World Society of Victimology. He's also a part-time judge in Court of Appeals in Arnhem. Professor Mark is a member of Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences. He has published more than 300 articles, authored and edited more than 30 books, and also guided more than 57 PhD projects. Professor Mark has received numerous national and international prizes and awards, including 2 royal decorations. So I'll request Professor Mark to take over the dais and deliver the valedictory address. I'll share my screen for your assistance.
Mark, unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Vipin. I was so impressed by the words spoken by Professor Bajpai that I thought that the valedictory address had already passed. So I have to be very careful with my words and try to make some additional remarks which are worthwhile. I'll start by thanking the organizers of this course, Jindal University and the World Society, for having organized a wonderful Asian course. And the Asian course in the postgraduate course has always been one of the best organized postgraduate courses around the world. And I particularly want to express my gratitude for the invitation to give this valedictory address to the key persons involved. Dr. Sani, who is a genius in organizing conferences. We all know that, but he's superbly supported by Dr. Vipin Vijayanair, who has once again outperformed himself and all others in making all of us comfortable. And I also want to express my gratitude to Professor Peacock and Michael O'Connell, AM, APM, invaluable leaders of the World Society. All of you, all 4 of you are not only superb experts in victimology, but also you rank among the finest human beings that I've ever met in my professional life. So thank you very much for the invitation. Valedictory address. How do you compose a valedictory address? I've taken this opportunity to act as a sort of a general rapporteur during the closing session of a major conference. So I'll try to summarize some of the major topics addressed during this conference, this course, and add some observations of my own. And I first like to congratulate the organizers with the format they chose for this course. Because of COVID, it's impossible to have a standard format consisting of eight consecutive days of having presentations. So instead, they choose 2 days a week, and I really think this was a wonderful sign of ingenuity, and it worked very well. I think it was very imaginative, and I'm equally impressed by the program that was served to all of us. And the objectives of the course all coincide with the aspirations of the disciplines of victimology and criminology, which are to promote international, interdisciplinary, empirical and normative discourse, and you have clearly succeeded in achieving all of these objectives. And let me briefly comment on the program of the course. I think the program, as always in Asia, was comprehensive. It was well structured. It's in line and overlapping with the table of contents of the leading handbooks on victimology, which have been published over the last decade or so. And I cannot see the slides in my screen, but can the other participants see my slides?
I'll just share the screen, sir.
Okay, thank you. And I mentioned just some of the main examples of the major handbooks which have been published over the last 10 years. First is Joanne Wemmer's handbook on which is called Victimology, titled Victimology, which is in French. The handbook written by or edited by Sandra Beauclerc, which is called Handbook of Victims and Victimology. Then, of course, a Japanese handbook written by Ademichi Morozawa in Japanese, and Victimology in Africa, edited by Robert Peacock in South Africa. And the fact that the program of this course mirrors the content of handbooks of this quality is indicative of the quality of the lectures which have been delivered, with only one exception. And then I was surprised, just surprised, by the complete absence of any presentation on mediation or restorative justice or alternative dispute resolution, except it was mentioned in the presentation by John Ducich. But that was only very minor. And to be honest, this is not meant as a criticism, but as an expression of relief, because I've been in so many conferences on victimology, which looked like conferences about restorative justice. About half of the presentations were about restorative justice and mediation. So I was relieved by the modesty of this part of victimology. So I will address the list of topics that are mentioned on this slide very briefly. The main topics that have been discussed during this post-graduate course, which have also been labeled as common denominators in victimology by Professor Kirchhoff in his presentation. And now you can see the list. It was very simple: the history and main theories, general objectives and scope of victimology, the impact of the pandemic, particularly vulnerable victims, cybercrime, victims in the criminal justice system, state compensation, and victim assistance. Mind you, for me, state compensation and victim assistance are completely different topics. So I move on and address history and main theories. Victimology has often been described as a scientific endeavor and a social movement, which was also done this time by Michael O'Connell. And in other words, it's about research and advocacy. It's a combination. It's not mutually exclusive, as in other domains of science. In victimology, it's joined together, and I think that's only good for academic research, and it's also good for society. The history of victimology has been adequately outlined very competently by Michael in his presentation. So the only comment I have to make is that the advent of victimology, so the start of the discipline, is quite often attributed to Hans van Hentig in his book, The Criminal and His Victim in 1948. But I always emphasize that it must be borne in mind that van Hentig only dealt with the subject from the angle of victim precipitation, which is the co-responsibility of victims for the crime occurring, which is a completely different perspective from what we see as the core essence of victimology today. Then about theory, I would say that most theories about how a crime came about, which is the genesis of crime, and also the genesis of victimization, are derived from criminology. You all know the main criminological theories on what was the reason for crime occurring, lifestyle, opportunity, and several others. So the main theories in victimology were derived from criminology. On the other hand, many theories on the impact of crime and on ways to diminish negative effects of crime are not derived from criminology, but from psychology. And the psychological theories have been bent in a victimological orientation. And allow me to explain that slightly more. The basic notions in victimological theory, can you put the next slide on, please? Basic notions in victimological theory are concepts we all are familiar with, like the belief in a just world, the ideal victim, victim blaming, secondary victimization, repeat victimization, crisis, resilience, coping, trauma, and PTSD. And all these concepts have been discussed in the various lectures that have been delivered these past few weeks. Now, my point is, and I don't think that that has been acknowledged as much as it deserves, is that in recent years, victimological theory formation tends to become more and more sophisticated. There's been a major development, and until 10 years ago, we were very happy to have made progress by developing the concept of differential victimology. And differential victimology means that we have recognized that victims are not a homogeneous group of people. So we have differential victimology means that we take into account in theory formation differences between different types of victims and different kinds of crimes. And although that is still very true, in the last 10 years or so, we have made further progress. We have gone on to the next level and made tailor-made theories, which are much more sophisticated. And I would say an example of this was demonstrated last week by Alice Bosma on fear and anger in connection with victim blaming and the theory of belief in a just world theory. And she has demonstrated that when people who are quite similar, victims of a similar orientation and nature, falling victim to a crime which is similar, can be treated in a very different way, depending on factors like the attitude they show, so they exhibit in a criminal justice process vis-a-vis police officers or prosecutors, and that can have major influence on the way they are treated and the risks they are running of being re-victimized. So I think we have made really significant progress in theory formation over the last 10 years in this respect. Then let me return to the basic, which is the objectives of and the scope of victimology, just very briefly, because we've all been familiar with this object, with this topic for a long time. But we never can take this for granted. And I think it's very important to state the objectives very clearly. The first objective of victimology and of criminology is the measuring of the incidence of crime, which is majorly done by the International Crime Victim Survey. Secondly, to assess the harmful impact of crime, which is usually much graver than expected, which was in this course very impressively expressed by Juan Nel when it comes to hate crime, but there's many other examples. And thirdly, to and perhaps most importantly, to find ways to minimize the misery, to improve the situation of victims. That's probably ultimately the goal of victimology, to promote justice in this world. The scope of victimology, which has been the subject of intense debate over decades, it's obvious that crime, victims of crime are the core people who deserve the attention of victimologists. Same is true for victims of abuse of power, which was addressed in this course by Arvind Tiwari. And there's all other topics that can be discussed and can be counted among the scope of victimology. One example was presented in this course by Vipka Hitu about family members of incarcerated perpetrators. There's many other examples. One of the other examples was just mentioned by Professor Bajpai, victims of wrongful conviction. And I think we shouldn't be shy about this. I know Professor Kirchhoff has been a proponent of inclusive victimology, meaning that all interesting topics that have something to do with real victimization should be included in our profession and should not be banned by a narrow definition of victimology. Same is true for crime prevention. Crime prevention was a contentious issue for a long time, because crime prevention doesn't concern victims. It concerns all people in the world. And so the question is, does crime prevention belong to the scope of victimology? I don't think that is a really interesting question, because it's obvious that everybody interested in victimization really should be interested in preventing in preventing victimization. And Irvin Waller expressed this very well during this course by speaking about the UN agenda and the strategic development goals, which includes the objective of 50% reduction of violent crime by 2030. And in another presentation, maybe this point was slightly overstated when Yogita Bayana said, well, even though prevention might be more important than retribution, it was also said in crimes, prevention is the only option. And I think that is an overstatement of the case. So prevention is important, but it's not the only thing that we should concern ourselves about. On the other hand, secondary prevention, meaning that people who have been victimized should be protected against being victimized again. And that is what we call secondary victimization. That is obviously the core issue and in the heart of the scope of victimology. There's no doubt about it. Then, and I don't want to be critical. I want to be supportive. But I have to make one remark about a point that was also raised already by Professor Sani, and that is the introduction of the labels of criminal special parts of victimology or criminology, or the entirety of criminology and victimology. Some people have made an argument to reframe or redirect criminology into critical criminology, or positive criminology. And the same appears now to be the case in victimology. And one example was proposed by Nathalie Ronel, good friend of mine, who introduced the concept of spiritual victimology. And I would just like to recommend to all the students in this course that no matter how brilliant the professors are who express themselves to you, please always keep an independent mind and always keep thinking for yourself and not take their words for granted. And I myself would advise you to be skeptical about labels such as spiritual victimology, because I think it tends to reduce reality. As I just said, one major objective of victimology is to find ways to minimize misery for all the victims in the world. Well, spirituality and religion might play a major role in that respect, and it does so in some countries. Like victimological research has demonstrated that spirituality and the church has played a major role in countries like Italy, where victim support systems by NGOs are underdeveloped, and we need to research the implications of the involvement of the church, religion, other spiritual movements. But I think it would be wrong to label that as spiritual victimology because it sounds too much like a reduction of reality as a reduction of our objective as victimologists. It is, to me, too much like a single issue political party. Okay, now let's turn to some concrete issues. And I hope you don't mind the previous remarks that sounds slightly critical, but it is more like thought-provoking. And I think that is one of the objectives of having a valedictory address, not only to repeat what other people have said, but also put some perspective around it and makes you think about the value of these remarks for future progress. The next item of business, of course, is the impact of the pandemic. That was already identified during the course that we organized, or that you organized last year at Jindal Global University. Mrs. Zarin called domestic violence the shadow pandemic, and others have referred to it as the second pandemic. The COVID pandemic has led to immeasurable suffering, not only in terms of the infection with COVID-19, but also in terms of issues that relate to victimology. And that was last year, but now, just very few weeks ago, the latest devastating wave of infections in India and in other parts of the world have had tremendous impact on issues that are relevant for victimology. First and foremost, of course, domestic violence. I was impressed by the presentation by Edna Aris, who clearly demonstrated the numbers, the methodological issues which have to be overcome in order to make reliable expressions about what impact the COVID pandemic has had on domestic violence. But it's obvious, everybody knows how important it is. And one of the reasons, of course, is that people work more often at home, are closer together, quite often in confined areas where the possibilities of domestic violence are raised in an immeasurable way. I was also, to be honest, surprised and impressed by the presentation by Gyula Shekhar on commercial sex workers. And what she explained was probably new to all victimologists in the world, that it's not only abuse, but she explained that 90% of the commercial sex workers in red light districts fall into a debt trap, that they have to borrow money from loan sharks, and in doing so, get a debt which can never be paid back within a lifetime, which exposes them to new threats and mistreatment, maltreatment, and violence to an extent that we've never seen before. Similar observations were made by Deepa Dubey about trafficking. Trafficking has been an issue in victimology, which has been studied intensively, but I wasn't aware of the fact that the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, has worsened the positions of trafficked people to the extent described in this paper. And finally, the same is true for victim assistance. Victim assistance has been hugely affected by the pandemic, which was in this course elucidated by Emilio Viano. But last year I paid attention to the same phenomenon, and I pointed out that the crisis, these are two observations that I still like to bring to your attention, like I did last year. Now we are in a stage of crisis, and people have a tendency to change their fundamental operating systems in a time of crisis. And I've argued last year, and I will repeat it again, that in times of crisis, it is bad advice to fundamentally change operating systems of victim support. That is not the time. It's time to reflect. It's time to reflect on the causes. It's time to reflect on long-term processes and then act. And in the meantime, you can take emergency measures. And one of these is introduce a buddy system to increase IT skills for senior volunteer visitors. Volunteer visitors have less and less opportunities to personally visit the victims, so they have to communicate with IT facilities, and most of the volunteer visitors are senior citizens in my country, in many other countries that I'm aware of. They have less IT skills, so they should be supported by buddies who can introduce them to the new techniques. All in all, it's obvious that the pandemic poses many new challenges for victimology. The next item that I would like to briefly address is particularly vulnerable victims. That is generally recognized that we need to introduce special services to the particularly vulnerable victims. All international instruments on victims' rights insists on introducing special services and special protection for vulnerable victims. But that's easier said than done. Let me be very clear about that. Who are the particularly vulnerable victims? First category, of course, recognized by everybody, is children. Why are they so vulnerable? Let me give you an example from the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, as was mentioned in the kind introduction by Vipin, I have been a judge for over 30 years now. I have never, ever tried a case of physical abuse of children. Never, ever. Whereas we know that children are physically abused constantly and on a large scale. It never comes to court. I checked with my colleagues on the court. We have a bench as a judge, and we don't have perpetrators of physical violence against children as perpetrators, as defendants in court. Why not? This problem is dealt with within the social services system. Then how about sexual abuse of children? In the first 15 years, when I was a judge, there was hardly any session of court where there was not at least one case of sexual abuse of children, which we also call incest. But that has disappeared over the last 15 years. And most of these cases are now also dealt with in the social services domain. And I'm concerned about that. I'm very concerned about that because I count this kind of criminality, this kind of victimization as so serious that we should really involve ourselves in this area as a judicial problem. Then my second example is Belgium, and that's a positive example. In Belgium, they found, the victim support organization in Belgium found out that when there was a serious incident within a family, like a murder, one of the parents was murdered, or when a sibling, a child in the family was murdered, there came victim support people to assist the family, but all the attention went to the parents. And the children were told to go to their room and just do some game or go play with other kids. There was no attention for the physical well-being for the children. And then one expert in that area who had lost her brother because of crime, she recognized the special needs of children in families when one of the family members was victimized. And she developed a manual for victim support in favor of child victims and next of kin, consisting of minors. And I think that's the way to proceed. That's a very positive example. The problem of child victims was also addressed in this course. I was very happy to see that Sangeeta Varan paid attention to it. And even more shocking was the contribution by Robert Peacock on street children. And in his paper, he described them as disposable outcasts. That's the way they are treated in South Africa. That's the way street children are treated in many other parts of the world. And I think it's a shame. It's a disgrace for mankind that this is possible. And I'm grateful to Professor Peacock that he called our attention to this, shameful state of affairs. We are much more familiar with females as particularly vulnerable victims. Well, of course, we know the problems of female infanticide. We know all the ideological backgrounds of the system discriminating against females, and it's very apt and it's very encouraging that so many people are still promoting special attention for females as victims of crime. So these are really particularly vulnerable victims. Then there's the category of the elderly, the senior citizens, was addressed in the paper by John Dusic, with the message that the main need they have is to be accommodated in safe and supportive sheltering circumstances, because quite often the family is the main threat to these people. And then my final point on this is, and that's really something to keep in mind, is we have general agreement to have to pay special attention to particularly vulnerable victims. But who are particularly vulnerable? If you count children, females, and elderly, you already have a majority of all victims. And yeah, and I have to tell you, please beware of labeling too many subgroups as particularly vulnerable, because if we do so, then the concept could lose some of its meaning. And I refer to the example of the European Union directive, which has already in its various articles labeled 17 different victim groups as particularly vulnerable. And there's societal pressure to add even more subgroups and label them as particularly vulnerable. Well, I would caution against that, because in a way, every victim is vulnerable. And we should be very careful to limit the number of categories which are particularly vulnerable, because if we stick to the most pressing cases or the most pressing casualties, then we are able to take special measures and protection in favor of these vulnerable people. The next item that I would briefly like to address is cybercrime. And cybercrime is an immense problem. In one of the papers in this course by Dubrinka and Chankova, the size of the problem was sketched as 10% of all people is now victim of fraud, only fraud or other online victimization. I have identified some additional figures, and it turns out that now every 11 seconds, mind you, every 11 seconds, there is an incident of ransomware. In 2025, that's not the distant future, that's 4 years from now, 50% of all crimes in the world are predicted to be cybercrimes. The damage of cybercrime in 2020 amounted to 6,000 billion US dollars. I hate to repeat myself, but the damage in 2020 last year was 6,000 billion US dollars. And it is even made worse and influenced by the COVID pandemic because of more employees working at home. And more employees working at home and having improvised IT facilities in order to facilitate working at home increases the likelihood of cybercrime against them. In 2021, 900 companies in my own country had to shut down simultaneously by one single attack. And let me cite an example from which I'm very familiar with, because I'm not only a member, but also a board member and vice president of the Royal Dutch Society of Arts and Sciences. which is a learned society, an academic society. So we are relatively poor. We are not a rich organization, but in 2020, last year, we suffered 500 cyber attacks in a single day, every single day, on our computer system. That is horrible. So we invested millions of dollars in order for better precautionary systems, and now that number has been reduced from 500 cyber attacks a day to 20 cyber attacks a week. But you can imagine how much money and effort it takes in order to take preventive measures. So the complexities and the potential remedies are analyzed in the paper that you heard by Deborati Halder. And I would like to add and emphasize 3 additional items. Why cybercrime is such a threat to society and why it's so hard to fight. The perpetrators are often hard to trace, and they cross many borders within a millisecond. And that raises many questions. Who is responsible for investigation and prosecution? Which country has jurisdiction? Nobody knows. Quite often, nobody knows. And then there's the question of the vast numbers of victims involved in a single incident. And please pay attention to this very point, because it supersedes the issue of cybercrime. If you have any crime which involves large numbers or a vast number of victims, then the notion of victims' rights assumes a completely different dimension. We can talk, and we will talk about victims' rights. We will talk about the position of victims. But it is so important to be aware of the fact that if one incident creates thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of victims, then the notion of victims' rights will inevitably blur. It's impossible to enforce victims' rights like participatory rights or other rights that will be discussed later. It's impossible to actually make these rights effective if you have to deal with thousands of victims at the same time. It's only a beginning of recognition of this basic fact when we deal with victims at the criminal court, the International Criminal Court, where we face the same problem. If you prosecute war criminals who have made thousands of victims, then it's very difficult to make victims' rights for these victims actually effective. It gives rise. No. My final item for cybercrime is how to advise victims on whether or not to pay ransom. That's a dilemma. It's a moral dilemma. The initial emotional responses never pay when you're extorted, because that's only an invitation to the perpetrators to apply ransomware to other victims. But it's not as easy as that. If you don't pay, you go bankrupt. So that is an extremely difficult dilemma. It's also quite often it's compared with the era of the airline hijackings some 45 years ago. Many of you will remember that. 45 years ago, we had hijackings of airplanes almost every month. And the mantra was never pay ransom, because that will only invite more crimes of that nature. And now we don't have any regular airline hijackings on a regular basis. And people feel many people feel that is caused by the fact that airlines and governments systematically refused to pay the demanded ransoms. But that's not true. Actually, we did some research on that, and when you look at the facts, out of 100% of airline hijackings, in a majority of cases, ransom was paid. The same as piracy. In a majority of cases, ransom has been paid, and still the airline hijackings have been stopped. Piracy has been reduced. So the same applies to cybercrime. Let's try to be creative and find different modes of redressing this problem. Okay, then now we come to victims in the criminal justice system. And please bear with me and forgive me that I always introduce the item of victims in the criminal justice system with a disclaimer by a preliminary remark, which is that most victims will never enter the criminal justice system. So it doesn't matter which rights they could have had in the criminal justice system. There's a deplorable reporting rate. It's less than 25%. So over 75% of the victims will never enter the criminal justice by that reason alone. And I have to admit, and this is a post-graduate course in Asia, and in the various sub-regions in Asia, the report rates are the lowest in the world. I checked the ICVS, the International Crime Victim Surveys, and all the sub-regions in Asia have the lowest reporting rates all over the world. So that is a very special item for attention when we speak of victims in the criminal justice system. This is an issue of access to justice, which is one of the most vital human rights, which is violated if over 75 or over 80% in Asia of the crime victims will never enter the criminal justice system. That is the background against we discuss victims in criminal justice system. It is one of the most frequently and profoundly debated issues in victimology. And the starting point for the reflection is always the 1985 UN Declaration, which has, and all the subsequent international legal instruments emphasize 4 basic rights: treatment and protection, treatment meaning acknowledgement and treating people with respect for their dignity, protection of victims, providing information on the status of their case, on the legal system, on ways to get reparation and restitution and compensation, participation, to play a part in criminal proceedings and not be a bystander or be treated as a bystander, and restitution or compensation. And all of that has to take into account the differences, the major differences between adversarial and inquisitorial systems. And as was rightly emphasized in the many contributions to this course that I've put between brackets, the emphasis in this kind of debate has to be on the law in action, because in many countries, in many jurisdictions, the victims' rights are firmly secured in the books. There are many legal provisions securing victims' rights, but in the in actual practice, they're hardly enforced, and there's no way of redress when victims' rights are being violated. That's another very significant fact, that there's no procedure for redress if victims' rights are being violated. And how many victims' rights do we need? That's the main problem. Also in countries like mine, which are the developed countries, very affluent countries, and where there's a race without end, always calling for new additional victims' rights, and that's also a danger. And I've often read, it's a balancing act. We have to look for an equilibrium. On the one hand, of the continuing, we have the forgotten party. There's no victims' rights at all. On the other hand, we have the call for a victim-centered justice system, where the victim's interests play an overriding role in every aspect. And I think both of these approaches are wrong. You have to find a midway, a balance between the rights of the defendant. Let's not forget that also the defendants in the criminal justice system deserve a fair trial, and we should never compromise that with a justification in terms of victims' interests. That's wrong. That's correcting. That's replacing one wrong by another wrong, and I'm opposed to that. And so the solution is, how do we balance it? And then my mantra has always been, and I've said it in so many lectures, never forget, this is not a zero-sum game. Okay, 40 years ago, there were many rights for defendants, no rights for victims. That was wrong. So to add new victims' rights, that's a gain. But that doesn't mean that we need to abridge defendants' rights. I think we should be in favor of victims, but we should not be against defendants. One of the eye openers for me in this respect was an article that Michael O'Connell and myself wrote on the death penalty, and the main conclusion was that we as victimologists should be opposed to the death penalty, also from the perspective of the victim. And that was an eye-opener for many people. And we proposed that also to the Pope when we visited the Pope in 2014. And he was convinced, and many people are convinced, that death penalty is not in favor of punitively oriented victims. No, it is against their interests. If you have a death penalty, there will be more victims and more murder victims. And the same is true for arguments in favor of stiffer punishments and a more punitive system. That is not in favor of the victims. On the contrary, it can harm victims' interests. So I'm nearly finished. I'm well within my time because Professor Bajpai took 10 minutes of my time. So now I probably need 7 more minutes to complete my presentation. The next item is state compensation. There is consensus that there should be a state compensation scheme in place in every country, in all countries of the world, in affluent countries as well as in developing countries. And today, virtually none of the existing schemes is functioning in a satisfactory way. I say virtually none because there are some exceptions. My favorite system is the UK system of state compensation, which is the most generous in the world, but most countries simply could not ever afford that. And the most prominent problem in this respect is the lack of awareness of the existence of a state compensation scheme, the lack of access to the system. That is the most important problem. And I've looked at the figures from different countries and continents, and I found as a deplorable situation from a country like Belgium, which is a very advanced country and system and relatively wealthy. And they had a state compensation system, which was, and there were only 300 applications annually, whereas there were hundreds of thousands of people who qualified for state compensation, and only 300 applications. So how come? And I found out that this is a very common pattern in many countries, and I had one of the most informative presentations in this course was presented by Sam Karkawi on the Indian system, and he presented a very extensive analysis of your system, and I saw the same analysis, the same conclusion, that it is the lack of awareness of the existence of the system, lack of accessibility, and maybe I can, as a side remark, I can observe that it was interesting that in India, it's interesting that it is state compensation is part of the criminal procedure. It was regulated, as I noticed, in Article 275A of the Code of Criminal Procedure. And in most countries, state compensation is not considered to be part of the criminal procedure. In most countries, state compensation is part of public law proper. That is really, I think that is really important. And I think I have to admit that state compensation isn't part of criminal procedure. In many countries, state compensation for victims of crime can even be awarded to victims who have not reported the crime. So it is very important to situate the state compensation system in the proper way in the legal system. By and large, I think research clearly indicates that the award in itself is much more important than the amount of the payment. So the award means that a recognition that the application was justified. And that means a signal of social solidarity, that the whole society supports the victim, and that is expressed symbolically by paying compensation by the state. I think, and the amount of the payment, and that is substantiated in many research articles that I've read, the amount of the money is less important. And here, because of that, these reasons, more than anywhere else, the notion of procedural justice is much more important than the level of the allowances made. The procedural justice means that you need to, when someone has submitted an application, he needs a timely decision on the application. It shouldn't take months or years before a final decision is made. So the applicant should be given information about the status of his application. And if it's refused to a certain extent, it should be explained. It should be carefully explained. That really means a lot to the victims. They can accept the procedure and the outcome if it is carefully explained. I come to my final slide, ladies and gentlemen. Please bear with me. It's about victim assistance. Victim assistance is very important. It's also called victim support, which is often provided in many parts of the world by NGOs. And it's commonly understood as consisting of three parts. I hope you can agree with that. It's about practical support. Practical support can mean if a person, a mother, is seriously harmed by violent crime, then somebody has to take care of the children. That is victim support. That is practical support. If my house is burgled and the door is kicked in, I need new locks instantly. And that is practical support, which we call victim support, practical support. Informational support, that's obvious. Information about the rules of the game, information about the legal system, information about the progress of the case, the outcome of the case, and emotional support. Emotional support, obviously, financial support is the exception rather than the rule. In many parts of the world, in Europe, for instance, we only have one country which includes financial support in victim support, which is Germany, where they have the Weiße Ring, the white rank, um, and they do a fabulous job on that account. The emphasis between these various parts of victim support can differ based on social economic conditions within a jurisdiction, and it can depend on demographics. Urban and rural situations are different. When people are very far apart in remote areas, that really affects the possibilities of victim support. I once saw a paper from Canada where the next door neighbors lived over 200 kilometers from each other. Similar situations occur in parts of Australia. Well, then the notion of victim support assumes very different challenges from urban situations, as you can imagine. And I have to admit that in less affluent countries, financial help can be more pressing than emotional support. That was emphasized by Chakrabarti, who deals in his paper with state compensation in India under the heading of victim support. And that was also mentioned by Professor Bajpai in his introductory remarks. I have to conclude by mentioning some findings of the international research that we conducted from Intervict and elsewhere. Number one, when you provide victim support, try not to treat victims as patients. Victims are not patients. There's nothing wrong with them. They are ordinary, normal people who have had to face very special circumstances. That should be the starting point. So you should try to avoid medicalization of victimization. And so I was kind of I felt some kind of anxiety when I read the paper by Salaya Baiba on trauma-focused treatment. And treatment, of course, is a word which is very close to medicalization of victims. Treatment, including the DSM perspective, which sounds very psychiatric to me, and somatic perspective. And when the emotional problems of victims are so severe that they approach the boundaries of psychiatry, I think they cannot be dealt with in victim support, that these people have to be referred to specialized agencies. It's very hard, that's my second point, it's very hard to actually reach a decent proportion of victims who are in actual need of victim assistance. Let's never forget, ladies and gentlemen, let's never forget that many victims, maybe even a majority of victims, are not in need of formally established victim support systems. If I become victimized tomorrow, I don't need victim support because my social circumstances, my social environment is of such a nature that I can find help within my own circle. And that counts for many people. But there is a significant percentage of victims who are in need of victim support. And if we restrict ourselves to this population, then in Western Europe, we have, which is probably the most advanced area when it comes to victim support, together with England and the United States and Canada, we can only reach 30% of those who are in actual need of victim support. And that is troubling, that is wrong, and we should improve that. And we need the help of dedicated professionals, such as yourselves in this audience, to improve this situation. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what I wanted to tell you today, what I wanted to share with you today. And I'm very grateful for your patience and your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mark. I think that was a very elaborated summary of our entire course, and I think our audience member and speakers would have revised the entire portion that we have learned over the 9 days. So thank you very much for that enlightening valedictory address. So I would like to take this opportunity to, first of all, thank Professor Sanjeev P. Sani, who has been an immense source of support and guidance to start with a 17th Asian postgraduate course through online mode. And I would also like to thank Professor Robert Peacock and Michael O'Connell, the co-course directors of this particular course, who have supported through their affiliation and association from World Society of Victimology. Then I would like to thank all our expert speakers. We had 35 plus expert speakers, and few of them are here as part of the valedictory address. And they did take out time and they dedicated that 1 hour, even otherwise also they were there as part of the course as a participant. So I would like to acknowledge a warm greeting to all of them and gratitude to all of them to be part of this. And lastly, I would like to thank all the moderators. We had close to around 15 moderators, and they have immensely contributed, being professional enough to take care of the respective sessions and the respective lectures by taking all major questions which were posted on the chat box. So great thanks to all the moderators and also the administrative staff who were behind this particular course in terms of creating the links, the IT people, the design team who have created the entire brochure and flyer. So thanks to all of them. And lastly, a very great thanks to all the participants who have dedicated 8 to 9 hours every Friday and Saturday across the July month, where they would have learned a lot about victimology, victim assistance, criminal justice system. And they have one more final step, which is the MCQ quiz, which starts in 10 to 15 minutes. So because of the paucity of time, I'll just request maybe a couple of speaker or participant to just share some feedback, comments, or anything that you would want to share. Anyone who can raise their hand, we will surely help you unmute yourself, or you can also post it in the chat box. We would be happy to read it there. Anyone who would like to share? Okay, we have a raised hand. I will just, Sneha Singh.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Vipin, for giving us this opportunity for the course. But I would, after the valedictory, I think I should not be saying too much. But I should appreciate one thing, that it felt like we were doing a course. We utilized Fridays and Saturdays better in the month of July. And the best part of the course was with Professor George Bischoff present throughout all the lectures. I think after a long period of time, it felt like, okay, you cannot miss when your professor himself is there attending the lectures and giving a feedback or a question answer round. So it was very good and well organized. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And yes, I should be preparing for my MCQ assessment and not talk too much anymore. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sneha. Anyone else? Okay, we have one more participant, Shiv Kumar.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Can you hear me, sir? Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, please go ahead.
Sir, it was a really wonderful experience and memorable event. Whole July month, we were occupied with this. And I feel that it's like 2 to 3 years course, which has been covered up in 9 sessions, wonderfully by the exemplary galaxy of speakers all over the world, and they have given us a lot of insight into this new upcoming subject, which will be helping all the many more students in India, as well as it will take up very nicely, sir. So even I, as a participant also, I was so involved in all the sessions. I learned, I made notes, and really it will help me in my day-to-day and also to help others. So this is how, and the course was well structured, and it was hats off to Jindal Global University for having such a 17th postgraduate victimology course to all this. And you have given us an opportunity, sir. We are very, very grateful for you, because such a big opportunity we encased, and it will be helpful. So once again, I will thank all, and I will thank Sahani sir, Dr. Sahani sir, and Dr. Vipin, everybody, all the organizers and the speakers. And it's a grand success, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shiv Kumar. I'll now request Professor Michael. I think he'll be happy to hear from you also, even feedback that you can share.
Thank you very much, Nina Mani, the welcome of the Indigenous people of the Adelaide Plains. I just wanted to make a couple of observations. It seems to me that Professor Gronhausen's summary, excellent summary this evening, that not only presented an overview of the previous 35 presentations, but also added some value in a way that he critiqued those points and provoked us to not only revisit them, but also in a very constructive way to think through, not, as he said, to just simply be like sponges absorbing the information, but rather people who are prepared to go out and critique it. I think what has been demonstrated by this course is, and the 36 speakers, is that victimologists are no longer voices crying in the wilderness. They are profoundly influencing people. And as a consequence of doing this course, it presents to many of the students an opportunity to consider, for example, how you might engage in scholarly endeavours, how you might engage in serving other people, such as those who have been betrayed by another person's hand. The question for you now is not so much about do you dare to give a little, but rather how much can you give as a consequence of the new knowledge and skills which you have acquired because O.P. Jindal and others have been prepared to share what they have learned, and that provides the foundation, hopefully, for your futures. But I could close on this particular point because it was previously mentioned that today is the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons, which is one of the most heinous violations of human rights. It's a profoundly violent human rights abuse. But today is also the International Day of Friendship. And one of the key purposes of having an International Day of Friendship is actually to go back and consider the root causes of things such as poverty, such as violence, such as human rights abuses, and what can be done by promoting a shared spirit of human solidarity to overcome those root causes. And I think this course has made a contribution. The challenge now is whether you can build on that contribution. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Michael. I think that was really encouraging to all the participants to take victimology ahead. We'll take last two comments. I'll just, I think, Pooja Tomar, I think we'll give her the chance. Yeah.
Hello, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
First of all, I would like to thank you, O.P. Jindal University, for organizing such a interesting, beautiful, and so in-depth certificate course. First of all, thank you to you also for managing beautifully. And sir, I am a forensic psychologist and I'm working with criminals majorly. So lots of time we obviously think about victims, but we do not, even after so much we are not able to get into so depth. So from this certificate course, we have learned that how this victimology things persist. We as a psychologist also, how and what kind of factors we should look upon, how we should together work like with criminals, with the victims on one platform. And another thing what I learned, it's not about India or Indian problem, it is worldwide. So we just can't say it's existing in India, this is the cause happening in India, or these are the pros and cons in India. No. And so many dignitaries and wonderful speakers came here and shared their knowledge. From their knowledge, we got idea of the world, the whole world, and that was the wonderful opportunity for us to learn from much means dignitaries. Thank you so much for providing this opportunity for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pooja. We'll take the last comment. I think Tanuja Sharma, please go ahead.
Hello, very good evening to all the dignitaries. And here, since everybody have covered so much, I would like to wholeheartedly thank the whole team of the organizers, Dr. Vipin, Dr. Sahani, and the whole team. And I have attended several programs, and believe you me, I always look forward to your programs. The level, that is incredible speakers, and the way it was organized, it is so appreciable. And I'm really thankful, Dr. Vipin. The emails, the reminders, when we get carried away with our work or something, your emails are a constant reminder, to keep us on the track. So I'm personally very, very grateful, and I'm sure each and every participant will agree with the same. As a professional, to be very honest, it was very enlightening is the only word which I could put across. As a counseling psychologist, somehow I initially thought that what is there in criminology and all. I did attend your conference last time, and it was such an eye-opener. The key point which touched my heart and made me join this course was the perspective towards the secondary victims. That perspective, that Nirbhaya cast, that particular case where how that gentleman's wife suffered, that was an eye-opener for me as a professional, that how the whole society need to be sensitized about this victim perspective towards the victim. So thank you so very much for this enlightenment. And my humble request to the university and you people in particular, because I'm so very impressed with the work you are doing, and what we call is the attitude with which you are taking these initiatives. So my humble request is, if Dr. Sahani and the center can take this up with a new education policy, where a basic information about the victim's right can be part of the basic curriculum in the colleges or in their senior secondary sections and all, so that children know their rights, women know their rights, men know their rights, and without any hesitation, people can rise up, whether at work or at education. So my humble request, and wholeheartedly, thank you so very much. Wishing the very best to the whole team. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Tanuja, and we'll surely take those feedback. And lastly, I would like to thank all our expert speakers, where you can see we have Professor Kershaw, Professor Beulah Shekhar, Professor Dobrika, Professor Mark, Professor Michael O'Connell, Professor Robert Peacock, and we also had Professor Bajpayee today. All these dignitaries were part of the valedictory session. So we thank you again. And the last thing that I want to point out, that we would be really happy to have you again for the 10th International Conference of Victim Assistance, which Professor Sani has mentioned. We would again invite all these expert speakers, and we will want to have them as a panelist or as a speaker, and we'll surely share the invitation to all the expert speakers so that you can be part of our 10th International Conference of Victim Assistance. So thank you all for being part of this immensely comprehensive postgraduate course, and I thank for all your support and gratitude, and we would hope that you continue this support. And for participants, I would want to wish you all the best for your MCQ assessment starting at 6, and you'll have 1 hour to finish it. And I hope all of you successfully complete it, and you would be awarded the postgraduate certificate course on victimology, victim assistance, and criminal justice. All the best, and thank you all, and thank all the speakers, and hope you have a great day ahead. Thank you very much all. we'll request all of you, if you have filled the feedback form, you can exit the meeting